My son said he was going to the cemetery to visit his father, so I secretly followed him to lay down some flowers. But when he arrived, the groundskeeper came up to me and he quietly sighed, "Don't go to the grave. You need to see what he's really doing." 1 hour later. Hello, beloved listeners. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I'm always curious to know which corners of the world you're tuning in from. Let me know your city in the comments. Enjoy the story. The dust in my apartment seems to lead a life of its own. You watch it swirling in the shafts of morning sunlight that pierce through the heavy velvet drapes. It spins in a slow, silent dance, settling on the spines of the books that fill every shelf, every floor-to-ceiling rack. This isn't my library. This is the library of Wayne, my late husband. I am its curator. It's been 5 years since he passed. Today marks exactly 5 years. The apartment is his, too. Everything here breathes him. His habits, his greatness. His massive dark mahogany desk sits in the center of the living room. His armchair permanently indented after years of long academic work. My own little corner, a small writing desk near the window crowded with geranium pots, has long been covered by the same layer of dust as everything else. I haven't opened the drawer holding my tools, my former tools, in 30 years. The morning of the anniversary always drags by, thick like molasses. I brewed some tea and sat at the kitchen table. The mug in my hands was slightly warm, but the cold felt like it was radiating from deep inside me. It's always like this when I'm waiting for them, my son Jabari and his wife Niara. The doorbell rang sharp like a gunshot in the library's hush. I knew it was them. They always show up on the anniversary, not out of grief, but because it's an opportunity. An opportunity to talk about money. "Mama, hey!" Jabari's voice, loud and deliberately cheerful, burst into the hallway with him. He gave me an awkward hug, his prickly cheek scraping against mine. He smelled of expensive cologne and anxiety. Nara followed him in like a shadow. On her face was an expertly manufactured expression of sorrow. She gave a silent nod, gliding into the living room, her eyes immediately darting to the bookshelves. She'd never loved these books, just collections, she'd once muttered under her breath, thinking he didn't hear. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, heading into the kitchen. "We could really use something stronger, Ma." Jabari sighed, collapsing heavily into his father's armchair. He always did that, sat in Kwame's chair as if trying on a life that didn't fit him. Things are going from bad to worse. He poured the tea in silence. He knew this prelude by heart. Now would come the complaints about unreliable business partners, about customs duties that were choking them, about their vague import-export venture that seemed to bring nothing but debt. "The container is stuck at the port of Charleston. Can you believe it?" Nara chutin. "We didn't want to bother you, Ma, especially today." Jabari lowered his voice, feigning delicacy, "But the situation is critical. We need financial help." Nothing stirred inside me. Before, I might have felt a pang of pity or guilt, but over the past 5 years, something had burned away. All that was left was dry, bitter ash. I looked at my 40-year-old son at his face, already etched with unearned wrinkles from constant dissatisfaction, and he didn't recognize the boy whose scraped knees he had once kissed better. "I'll think about it, Jabari," he replied quietly. "I need to check what he have." He pursed his lips in annoyance. Niara shot him a quick angry glance. They had been counting on immediate consent, on that blind maternal laugh that forgives all and he gives everything. Suddenly, Jabari stood up. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, exactly as his father used to do. But in him, there was none of his father's stature, just a cheap parody. He stood like that for a minute, then turned. His eyes were moist. He knew this trick. He'd used it since childhood when he wanted something badly. 5 years. He sighed, his voice trembling. 5 years since Pop left, and he still feel like he's about to walk through that door. "Yeah, I'm going to the cemetery." You need to sit there alone. Talk to him. A single artfully deployed tear rolled down his cheek. Nara watched him with ill-concealed admiration. Now that's a winning move. And he fell for it. In that moment, all my knowledge of him, all the bitter experience of the last few years retreated. Somewhere deep inside, in that forgotten corner where hope still lived, a warmth stirred. What if there really is something human left in him? What if the memory of his father isn't just an empty word? This thought was so welcome, so sweet that he clung to it like a drowning person to a straw. The hunger for sincerity, for any sign of a son's love, was stronger than common sense. That's good, Jabari," he whispered, and my voice genuinely trembled. "That's very good." He nodded, wiping the tear, and he quickly headed for the exit, as if afraid he might notice the deception. Nara stayed for another minute to seal the effect. "He's taking it so hard, Miss Jensen." She could, using my late husband's surname. He loved his father so much, he just doesn't show it. She laughed. He was left alone in the deafening silence, broken only by the clock's ticking, and the warmth, the timid hope began to grow in me. He suddenly desperately wanted to see it, to see my son at his father's grave alone in silence and sorrow. Not to catch him or verify him, but to believe, to feel, even for a moment that we were a family connected by shared memory. He quickly changed, taking 3 deep red carnations from the vase, the ones I'd bought that morning for William's portrait. He called a cab to the next street over so they wouldn't spot me. The whole ride imagined arriving standing hidden behind an old oak tree, and seeing him, his head bowed at the family mausoleum. And maybe then he would find the strength to help him one last time. Pine Cemetery greeted me with cool calm and the rustling of our trees. The air smelled of decaying leaves and the tranquility. He walked along the familiar gravel path leading to our family crypt. My heart pounded with excitement, with hope. He could already see the massive granite gates of the mausoleum in the distance when a man tall and stooped in wet claw emerged from around a corner, and he walked toward me. It was Ephraim, the groundskeeper. He'd worked here for at least 10 years. Kwame had once helped him either with housing or with work. He don't remember the details. He knew him by sight. We always exchanged silent nods, but today he didn't nod. He walked directly toward me, and there was something in his eyes that covered my hope with a crust of ice. His face, usually placid, now resembled a severe mask. He walked almost up to me. He stopped, clutching the carnations. "Miss Jensen?" He sighed. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but every word burrowed into my consciousness like a shard of glass. "Hello, Ephraim," he replied, trying to smile. "I'm going to see my husband. Andy, my son is here somewhere." He interrupted me, placing his rough, calloused palm on my shoulder. He didn't feel it because at the moment, he looked me straight in the eye, and a chill ran down my spine. "Ava," he whispered so softly he barely heard. His face was tense and grim. "Don't go to the crypt, please. Not right now. Wait. You need to see what he's really doing." Ephraim's words didn't cause me fear or a desire to argue. They simply fell into the ringing void that had opened inside me. The carnations in my hand suddenly felt alien, lifeless. He nodded silently. He didn't ask why or what do you mean. He already knew he wouldn't like the answer. He turned and without looking but walked away from the main avenue along a barely visible path overgrown with weeds. He followed him like a sleepwalker. We walked in complete silence, the only sounds being the rustle of our steps on the dry leaves and the distant mournful cry of a crow. He led me to a small hill, to an old leaning fence of some long-forgotten grave. From here, through the dense branches of wild lilac, our family crypt was visible as clear as day, somber, majestic, made of black granite. It seemed an unshakable monument to the honor and the dignity of the Jensen lineage. "You can see everything from here and they can't see us." Ephraim sighed just as softly, then moved aside toward a tree, giving me space at the fence. He seemed to understand that this was something he had to see alone. He gripped the cold metal of the fence. He didn't have to wait long, less than 5 minutes. 2 figures appeared from the main avenue. Jabari and Niara. My son wasn't alone. He hadn't come to talk to his father. He'd brought his wife. They weren't carrying flowers. Their stride was businesslike, quick, no more sorrow, no more pause at the entrance to cross themselves or just stand in silence. Jabari pulled a set of keys from his pocket. He inserted one, large and antique, into the keyhole of the crypt's heavy wrought iron door. A loud grinding sound echoed through the cemetery silence. The door groaned open. They walked inside as if entering not a tomb, but a storage unit, in ordinary grass. The cold inside me, which had been only a premonition until then, began to gain density. It became solid, heavy. He watched, unable to look away, as if my eyelids were forced into their sockets. A few more minutes passed. As that person approached the crypt, a man in a long, dead coat, despite the relatively warm day. He couldn't see his face. He stayed in the shadows, but his entire figure radiated something unpleasant, slick. He didn't greet them. He just peeked inside and sighed something brief. And then he saw the movement. Jabari and Niara emerged, carrying objects in their hands, items carefully wrapped in dark velvet, one elongated, the other almost square. They handed them to the man. He didn't know what they were, but the way they did it, quickly, looking around nervously, sighed everything. The wine carried snippets of their conversation to me. Their voices were low but distinct in the dead silence. "Flawless forgery," the stranger sighed, slightly lifting the edge of the velvet. "A pro couldn't spot it. He told you the master wouldn't let us down." My son replied, a note of pride in his voice. "This isn't cheap knockoff stuff." "And the museum, is everything smooth with the Atlanta Museum of Art?" Nara asked. Her voice was sharp with greed. "The museum director, old fool. He's desperate for this Lima Blastia's century solder for his collection." Jabari chuckled. "He'll swallow it whole and he won't choke. The main thing is your people get the right documents to show it was a found treasure." And in that moment, something happened that changed everything forever. The warmth, that maternal warmth he had nurtured for 40 years. The one that made me forgive lies, cover debts, and believe in tears of repentance. That warmth didn't fade. It vanished instantly like a flash of lightning that turns a living tree into charcoal. In my chest, where the love for my son used to be, a block of ice formed. No more. No ice. Something denser, heavier, compressed from disappointment and the 40 years of foolishness. It wasn't even hatred. Hatred is a feeling. It requires energy. This was called crystalline clarity and the boundless, heavy sorrow. They weren't just thieves. They were distractors. They had turned his father's grave, my husband's crypt, into a French's warehouse. Dedicated his entire life to the study of history, to the preservation of originals. He hated falsehood in all its forms. And his own son, his flesh and blood, used his ashes to cover up the trade of fakes. It was sacrilege of such magnitude that my mind refused to fully grasp it. It didn't cry. There were no more tears. They seemed to have frozen somewhere before reaching the surface. The man in the cot nodded, took the bundles, and vanished just as quickly. Jabari and Niara glanced inside one more time, adjusted something, and then with the same grating sound, they closed and locked the door, and they left without laying a single flower. I don't remember saying goodbye to Ephraim. I think he just nodded at him and he walked away. He said nothing, and he was grateful for that. He walked along the paths, past the crosses and the obelisks, and he saw nothing. He moved automatically, walked out the cemetery gates, caught a cab, and he gave my address. The whole way home, he stared out the window at the flashing houses, trees, and the people, feeling as if he were inside a glass bell. The world existed somewhere outside, and he was here in a soundless, cold void. Entering the apartment, he stopped in the entryway. The air was permeated with the smell of books, old paper, and his tobacco, which seemed like it would never air out. He walked slowly into the living room, past his desk, past his armchair, past the rack stacked with the fruits of his life. All of it suddenly seemed like a set design, beautiful, majestic, but dead. My gaze fell upon my corner, the small writing desk near the window, cluttered with old receipts, my dusty, forgotten space. He approached it slowly, as if performing a ritual, drawing my finger across the dusty lid, then pulling out the bottom, deepest drawer. It yielded with difficulty, screeching. Inside, beneath a stack of timed papers, it lay a simple wooden box unadorned. He took it out. The tiny bronze key always hung on a chain around my neck beneath my clothes next to my cross, a reflexive habit left over from the days when the contents of this box were my life. He inserted the key into the lock and he turned it. Click! He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bit of that green velvet were my tools. They hadn't tarnished. A small yet powerful jeweler's loop, a compact metal-cased ultraviolet lamp, a set of fine tweezers and scalpels. And beneath them, in a lower compartment, lay written hardcover for volumes, my personal reference books which he had compiled back in graduate school, historical pigments and their chemical composition, watermarks 15th century to present, binding techniques of various eras. He picked up the loop. The cold metal felt familiar in my palm. He lifted it to my eye and he looked at my skin. Every line, every pore became visible with merciless clarity. For 30 years, he hadn't used these tools. For 30 years, he had been just a wife, then a mother, then a widow, a keeper of someone else's memory. But today, at the cemetery, something had died, and something else long buried began to awaken. He carefully closed the box. He didn't wipe the dust from the writing desk. Tomorrow, he would put things in order here. My order. The night passed without sleep. He didn't lie, looking at the ceiling or turn over old grievances in my memory. He sat in an armchair in silence and he just stared at the toolbox which sat on my desk. He wasn't planning anything, not constructing schemes for revenge. He was simply allowing the cold clarity to fill me to the brim, pushing everything else out, like an old dusty vessel that has finally been emptied to be filled with something clean and transparent. He woke up with the first light. There was no more haste, no more familiar morning. He finished. He took a rag and a bucket of water and for the first time in years began to tidy up my corner. He wiped the dust from the writing desk layer by layer until the texture of the old wood reappeared. He repotted the geraniums. He cleaned the glass on the small bookshelf that held my books, not me. They weren't great works, but modest monographs, collections of articles he had written before getting married. He looked at my name on the covers, Ava Jones, and he felt like he was meeting a long-lost acquaintance. He didn't touch the rest of the apartment. Library, his desk, his armchair, all remained in their dusty memorial neglect. But my little corner by the window now shone with cleanliness. It was my staging ground. The doorbell rang precisely at noon. This time there wasn't a hint of yesterday's false sorrow. It was short, businesslike, impatient. They walked in without ceremony. Jabari didn't even try to hug me. His face was strained. Nara looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. Their visit had one single purpose. Wilma, did you think about it? Jabari asked right from the doorway, walking into the living room. The first, he replied in an even voice. They exchanged glances, their eyes read more of these old people's rituals, but they complied. They sat down, Jabari in his father's chair, Niara on the edge of the sofa, ready to jump up at any second. He went to the kitchen. My movements were slow and precise. He took out the tea leaves, poured boiling water, sliced a lemon. He could hear them talking in low voices in the living room. She's stalling. Niara hissed. Calm down. Where is she going to go? Jabari replied. She'll drink her tea and design everything. He placed the tray with the cups on the table. The porcelain queen cat softly. He sat down opposite them in a simple wooden chair that usually stood in my kitchen. He did not sit in my usual place. He poured the tea. Jabari tapped his fingers impatiently on the armrest. Niara picked up a cup but didn't take a sip. Ma, we don't have time for beating around the bush. Jabari began breaking the silence. We need an answer today. It's a large amount. We need to get it done before the banks close. He took a small sip. The tea was hot, tart. It burned my throat, but the cold remained inside. He looked up at them calmly without judgment, just looking at them like the strangers who had come to me on business. Jabari, is your business? He began softly as if thinking aloud. Related to antiques? Jabari froze. His fingers stopped tapping. He looked at me in surprise. What? He asked. He was just remembering my old work. He continued just as calmly, looking into my cup. Rare books, manuscripts. He was curious what exactly you deal with. Import, export is so vague. A silence fell. 1 second. Another. Indeed, and Jabari laughed loudly, boisterously. It was not a cheerful laugh. It was a laugh of superiority. The laugh of a person listening to a child's babbling. Ma, please, he sighed, catching his breath. Don't bore us with your old hobbies. What manuscripts? We're dealing with serious things. Logistics, supply chain. Do those words mean anything to you? What could you possibly know about any of this? Niara wasn't laughing. She wore a quiet, pitying smile. She reached across the table and patted my hand condescendingly. Her fingers were cold. Miss Jensen. Dear, she patted. You should be thinking about your health. Don't worry your head about things you don't understand. We'll handle all the details ourselves. She removed her hand and her gaze hardened, starting with the bank transfer. Jabari sighed. We need to go. They stared at me, waiting. There was nothing in their eyes but greed and condescension. They saw before them a quiet, senile old woman who had suddenly indulged in a memory. They mistook my calm for apathy, my question for a sign of civility. They didn't see me. They only saw a wallet that was inexplicably slow to open. And in that moment, he understood that he possessed a weapon they didn't even suspect, their own certainty of my nothingness. He watched the light from the window fall on Niara's face, highlighting the harsh crease by her lips. He saw the vein twitching on Jabari's temple from impatience. He felt no more pain from their words. He felt something inside me finally calibrating, adjusting, like the optics in a precise instrument. He slowly placed the cup on the saucer. The sound seemed deafening again in the strained silence. All right. He sighed. My voice was even, perhaps even too tired. I understand you. The relief on their faces was almost palpable. Jabari leaned back in the chair. Niara allowed herself a short triumphant smile. You won't need to review my assets, he added. Jabari immediately sat up straight. Of course. He nodded. See what's in the accounts. Call the bank if you need to. We can wait for an hour. No more, he replied. You need time. I'll do it alone. He stood up, indicating that the conversation was over. They were displeased by the delay, but confident in the result. They left, throwing instructions over their shoulders about which bank, which account, how best to make the transfer to avoid extra questions. He nodded silently, seeing them to the door. When the door closed behind them, he stood for a minute in the silence, and then he returned, not to the phone to call the bank. He returned to my clean, shining writing desk. Their words, what could you possibly know, still hung in the air. They had made a mistake. They didn't just underestimate me. They forgot who he was. He was just starting to remember. He didn't wait until evening. Picking up the phone, he found a number in an old address book, the direct line to the lodge at Pine Ridge Cemetery. The rings went on for a long time. He thought number 1 would answer. Hello. Ephraim's familiar low voice answered. Ephraim, this is Eva Jones. He sighed. My voice did not tremble. It was the calm, business-like voice he hadn't used in 30 years. I need to get into the crypt tonight. Can you help me? A silence fell on the other end. Brief, not a silence of surprise, but a silence of consideration. Yes, he replied simply. What time? When the gates are closed. Wait, nomor 1 will be here. Gate. By the side gate. I'll be waiting in 3 hours. He hung up. He put the phone down. That was it. The first step was taken. Night fell fast upon the city. He dressed entirely in black, taking with me only the toolbox wrapped in an old shawl and a small but powerful flashlight. He called a cab to the next street again. A cemetery at night is a completely different place. By day it was full of quiet sorrow. Now it was full of ringing, tense silence. The moon shone through the bare tree branches, drawing strange skeletal shadows on the ground. By the side gate, just as he had promised, Ephraim was waiting for me. He looked like a shadow merged with the old brick wall. He silently unlocked the gate, let me in, and he just as silently locked it again. We walked along the empty paths. He felt no more fear. Strangely, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Here, among the dead. He felt more alive than he had in years in my Museum of an apartment. We approached the Jensen crypt. In the moonlight, it looked even more massive, more foreign. Ephraim pulled out a set of keys from his pocket. Not the one Jabari had. This was his work set. He didn't rush to open it. He turned to me. His face in the semi-darkness was stern and deeply sad. Miss Jones, he began quietly, and in his voice he heard a deep, long-standing respect. Your husband, Wami Jensen. He was more than just a man to me. A long time ago, when my family was out on the street, he was the only one who extended a hand. He paid for my education, the history department at Morehouse College. He saved us. Everything I have is thanks to him. He paused, swallowing a lump in his throat. I've been watching your son for 6 months with disgust. I saw how he turned his father's grave into a public thoroughfare. At first, he thought it was just some of his shady dealings. But then he started listening, taking notice. He reached into his coat and he pulled something out, a small worn notebook with a dead cover. He handed it to me. Everything is here. He sighed. Dates, times of meetings, license plate numbers of the cars that came here, snippets of conversations he managed to overhear. He did it for his memory. He didn't know what to do with it. And then yesterday, you came. He took the notebook. It was heavy, not from the weight of the paper, but from the weight of the betrayal documented within its pages. He didn't open it. He just gripped it tightly in my hand. Thank you, Ephraim. He sighed quietly. He nodded, and in that simple gesture, there was more understanding and the alliance than he had seen in my entire life. He inserted the key into the lock. The grinding of the metal sounded like a scream. The door gave way. A smell of cold, damp, and the dust of centuries wafted out. The spot is here. Ephraim sighed, pointing to one of the marble slabs on the wall to the left of the sarcophagus. It was indistinguishable from the others. Press here and here simultaneously near the bottom. It will move. He handed me the crypt's heavy key. Lock yourself in from the inside. I'll be nearby. When you're done, just open the door. I'll hear it. He left, dissolving into the shadows. He stepped inside, turning the massive key in the lock on the inside of the door. Click! He was alone. He switched on the flashlight. The beam of light picked out William's stone sarcophagus from the darkness. Dusty, forgotten. He walked over to the wall Ephraim had indicated. He found 2 points at the bottom of the slab, barely noticeable indentations. He pressed. So there was a quiet click, and the slab moved easily aside, revealing a deck niche. The hidden compartment, carefully laid out inside, were several objects wrapped in that crimson velvet. He took one, the largest, placed it on the sarcophagus lid, and he unwrapped it. It was an old icon on a dead wooden board, the savior not made by hands. The face was painted with astonishing finesse, with deep, unforgiving sorrow in the eyes. The golden background glimmered dimly in the flashlight's beam, the varnish darkened by time, the net of perfect crackle, the tiny chips in the wood. Everything spoke of authenticity, a master's work, a true masterpiece that could grace any museum. He placed my toolbox next to it and he opened it. My fingers instinctively found the familiar tools. First, the loop. He held it up to the icon. My eye, my brain, my memory. Everything worked as one smooth mechanism. 30 years of inactivity vanished as if they had never been. He was myself again. He examined every millimeter. The brush strokes, the composition of the ground visible in the chips, the method of securing the splines on the reverse side. Everything was flawless, almost. He pulled out the Ophe lamp. In its eerie violet light, the old varnish should have given off an even yellowish green glow. It did, but when he swept the beam over the folds of the savior's robe, in the places where the artist had used lit white to paint the light, he saw what he was looking for. Sir, in the brightest spots, the glow was different, brighter, colder, almost chalky. It was a tiny foreign fluorescence, the fluorescence of titanium dioxide. It's anotasiform. This pigment wasn't patented until the early 20th century. To use it in an icon passed off as a 15th century work, could only be done by someone absolutely confident in their genius and the buyer's blindness. A masterful forgery, brilliant, but with one tiny, arrogant mistake, a mistake that could only be made by one man. In the cold silence of the crypt, he suddenly remembered his name very clearly. The brilliant restorer who had been shamefully expelled from the National Institute of Expertise for unethical copying experiments. A man obsessed with creating the perfect fake. Anatol Voronov. I'll keep this name as he is an external character, not part of the Mindblack family and a specialist. Often non-local specialists are hired. He knew the forger and he knew what he had to do now. He carefully placed the icon in the velvet, folded the tools into the box. The quiet click of the lock sounded in the dead silence like a period marking the end of a long sentence. He returned everything to the hidden compartment, sliding the slab into place. It settled silently, leaving no more trace, as if he had never been here. He turned the key and the heavy crypt door ground open, letting in a sliver of the night sky and a gust of fresh cold air. Ephraim was waiting for me at the entrance like a silent guardian. He silently held out his key and the one he had given me. He took them, nodding just as silently. Wade didn't need words. He understood everything from my face. He turned and he walked to lead me to the exit. His shadow glided ahead, pointing the way. The journey home passed like a fog. The city was beginning to wake up. Occasional cars sped through the streets. Sanitation workers cleaned the sidewalks. Andy rode in the cab, clutching a Prime's-worn notebook in my pocket, feeling the icy resolve born yesterday on the hill by the old fence harden and temper inside me. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling of a surgeon who makes a precise diagnosis, and he knows the operation will be complex but necessary. He didn't call the police. That would be too simple, too noisy, and it wouldn't restore his desecrated honor. The police would punish the criminals, but he had to destroy the lie itself, the web they had so long and so skillfully spun. And to do that, he had to strike not at their hands, but at the very center of the web. But in the apartment, he didn't lie down. He brewed myself strong black coffee and he sat down at my clean, tidy writing desk. The first rays of sun touched my window. Yesterday, the anniversary was over. A new day of action had begun. On the desk lay an old telephone directory with numbers he hadn't used for decades. He found the one he needed. Paolo Stephens, director of the Atlanta Museum of Art. He remembered him as a young, ambitious graduate student who often visited US and he looked at Kwame with reverence. The old fool, as my son had called him. He dialed the number. My fingers didn't tremble. Director's office. A cheerful woman's voice answered. Hello, please connect me with Mr. Stephens. I'm calling about an urgent matter. He's in a meeting. What is this concerning? Tell him it's Ava Jones. I'm sorry. How did you spell that? He repeated slowly, enunciating every syllable. Ava Jensen Jones, the wife of the late Kim Jensen. The woman on the other end hesitated. My husband's name still carried weight in these circles. One moment, please, she sighed in a different, more respectful tone. He waited, listening to the wall clock tick. It was counting the seconds of my old life. Ava Jensen Jones. Paolo Stevens' voice was exactly as he remembered it. Deep, slightly velvety, with notes of self-satisfaction. What a pleasant surprise. It's been so many years. Please accept my deepest condolences for your loss, dear. Wayne was a beacon for all of us. He was saying the words one is supposed to say. Polite, empty. He expected me to start asking for something, complaining, reminiscing. Paolo, hello. He replied calmly, I am calling you not only as the widow of Wamiama Jensen but also as the former senior archivist of the National Institute of Expertise. A silence hung on the other end, short but very telling. The meeting apparently ended instantly. I'm listening. Ava, all the velvety condescension vanished from his voice. Weariness had replaced it. I have become aware that your museum plans to acquire a valuable exhibit soon. The Lima Blestia Century Psalter, if I'm not mistaken, from a certain private collection. Silence again, longer this time. He hadn't expected that. That information is for internal use. He sighed cautiously. How do you have this knowledge? The source is irrelevant right now. He continued just as evenly. What matters is this. I can state with almost 100% certainty that you are being deceived. The psalter being offered to you is a high-grade forgery. But why had experts? Panic and the outrage laced his voice. The preliminary conclusion was absolutely positive. Your experts weren't looking for what they needed to look for. He hypothesized that the white pigment used to detail the initials contains the anode as a form of titanium dioxide, a chemical anachronism. This pigment could not have existed in the Lima Blestia century. Check it and you will see for yourself. As he spoke, he heard my own voice from outside. It wasn't the voice of Ava the widow, Ava the mother. It was the voice of Jones the expert who tolerates no more doubt. Paolo Stephens was silent. He could almost physically feel the thoughts rushing through his head. A blow to his reputation, a scandal, The loss of state funding, titanium dioxide. He muttered as if in a daze. But who is capable of such asking? I think you know the answer yourself. Power. He replied, delivering the final blow. Remember who was expelled from the institute about 20 years ago for handling copies too loosely? Remember Anatol Voronov? That name acted like an electric shock. Voronov, God, he thought he drank himself to death somewhere. As you can see, no more. His talent has found a new application. Powell, I strongly urge you to immediately stop the deal and conduct a full independent forensic analysis before it is too late. Yes, of course. Ava, I am in your debt. I will cancel everything immediately. We must meet later. I interrupted him. First, do what you must. Goodbye. I hung up. The apartment was quiet again, but the silence was different. It no more longer oppressed me. It hummed with tension like a taut string. I knew that right now in the museum director's office, phones were ringing, orders were being given, and the nearly signed contract was flying into the wastebasket. He pictured Jabari's face when the buyer called him. He pictured Niara's panic when they realized that their biggest score, the very money they were supposed to use to pay off their unreliable partners, had vanished, turned into smoke. He stood up and he went to the window. The day was breaking. Their easy money was gone. Their creditors, he was certain, don't like to wait. The clock on the wall kept ticking. Now it was counting down to the explosion. He intended to wait for it right here on my staging ground in complete tranquility. 2 days passed. 2 days of deafening tense silence. They didn't call. They didn't come. He knew this was the calm before the storm. They were trying to figure out what had happened, trying to salvage their deal, to contact their accomplices. But he had shot the main thread in their web, and now the whole structure was collapsing, burying them beneath it. He wasn't idle. He dedicated these 2 days to reorganization, with the help of Ephraim, who came to check on me under the pretense of fixing a leaky faucet. He carried out a small revolution in my apartment. We moved Duami's massive oak desk against the wall. It was no more longer the center of this universe. It became just a piece of furniture. And in the center of the living room, in the spot where my husband's desk had reigned, he placed my writing desk, my small, modest, but now shining clean workspace. He brought the books that had been gathering dust on the shelves from my bedroom. My books, the fairy monographs and the reference guides. He spread them out around me on the desk, on the chairs. He took out Ephraim's notebook and he began making notes on a large sheet of butcher paper. License plate numbers, dates, names he managed to decipher. What emerged was a diagram, a map of their criminal life. For the first time in years, this apartment stopped being a mausoleum, and he started looking like an office. My office. On the third day, they came. He knew it was them even before the knock. More accurately, it wasn't a knock. It was a furious broken pounding. They were hitting the door with their fists. He didn't rush. He carefully put down my pen and he closed the notebook. He stood up and he walked slowly to the door. The sound of the blows grew louder. Jabari's voice, distorted by rage, was added to it. Mom, open up. I know you're home. Open it right now. He turned the key in the lock. The door flew open so abruptly that it hit the wall. They burst into the hallway like two predators. Their faces were distorted by a mix of fear and hatred. Yesterday's condescension, the day before's fake sorrow, all of it peeled away like cheap gold plating, revealing an ugly, greedy car. What have you done? Jabari roared, advancing on me. His eyes were red, crazed. What did you say to who? The deal is off. We've been burned. The buyer is gone. It was you. You ruined everything. You destroyed us. He yelled, spitting saliva. Before, he would have cringed in fear, burst into tears, and started justifying myself. But now he simply stood and he looked at him calmly, like a doctor looking at a patient having a fit. He silently turned and he walked back into the living room. He sat down at my desk and he picked up my pen. He followed me, never stopping his shouting, I'm talking to you. Look at me. He dipped the pen into the inkwell and he wrote down not the license plate number from Ephraim's notebook on the paper. He didn't look at him. Destroyed you? He asked quietly, not lifting my gaze from the paper. My voice in the middle of his hysteria sounded deafeningly calm. Or exposed you? Jabari fell silent for a moment, thrown off by my tone. What? What are you saying? What exposure? Have you lost your mind? Oh woman, I'm merely consulting. He continued just as quietly, drawing a line from the license plate number to the date of the meeting. Imagine, the museum finds my old hobbies very valuable, much more valuable than your import-export. And then he looked up at them. He looked first at Jabari, then at Niara. He watched as the realization dawned on them as disbelief in their eyes turned to horror. They looked at me and he didn't see their quiet, harmless, senile mother or an accessory to the apartment and the pension. They saw a woman sitting at her working desk in the center of the room. A woman with a straight but a cold, clear, absolutely calm gaze, The gaze of Anne expect delivering a final verdict. They saw Ava Jones, the archivist, whom they had buried and forgotten 30 years ago. You, Jabari whispered. He took a step back. All his fury had drained away, leaving behind only sticky primal fear. You called the museum. It didn't answer. It just looked at him. You used his grave as a warehouse. Jabari? He sighed, and my voice, though quiet, filled the entire room. There was no more pity in it, only a statement of fact. You traded in forgeries from your father's crypt. You dragged his name, his legacy, his whole life through the mud for money. He paused, letting the words soak into the silence. There is nothing left to destroy here. These words hung in the air, final and the inevitable, like a sentence. Jabari looked at me, and there was no more rage in his eyes, only empty childlike terror. He opened and he closed his mouth like a fish thrown onto the bank, but couldn't utter a sound. He looked for salvation, for support, but turning to his wife, he saw only cold, calculated panic. Nara had already regained her composure. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by something else. A nasty, venomous resolve. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me, already calculating her next move. She grabbed Jabari's arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve. Let's go, she hissed. It's useless to talk to her. She's not light in the head. She dragged him toward the exit. He walked stumbling, his glazed eyes fixed on me. Before disappearing behind the door, Niara turned around and in her glare. I read everything. This isn't offer. This is a declaration of war. They left. I remained sitting at my desk in the silence that followed. I knew Niara wouldn't give up. Like a wounded snake, she would wreath Andy strike until the end. I had to wait for her blow. Andy had followed 2 days later. My neighbor Miss Anime called me. Her voice trembled with outrage. Ava, did you see tonight's Gossip Hound? Sit down before you read it. He didn't subscribe to the tabloids. He went to the convenience store and he bought the cheap foul-smelling shit. Andy on page 3, beneath the screaming headline, Widow's Grief or Senior Insanity, he saw my picture, and award one taken about 10 years ago at some anniversary. Next to it was a photo of Jabari and Niara posing as a loving suffering couple. The article was a masterpiece of lies and manipulation. An anonymous source close to the family recounted a heartbreaking story. How the poor widow of the great Academy Chami Jensen, Ava Jensen Jones, had never recovered after her husband's death. How she had retreated into herself, started rambling, confusing reality with fiction, and how, in her deranged state, she had invented a monstrous story to blacken the name of her only son, and his wife, who were dedicated to her care. There were hints that he might have even connected with some con artist myself, and he was now confused, trying to shift the blame onto my children. The final core was especially vile. It's possible the elderly woman obsessed with antiques is herself the mastermind of a criminal ring. And her accusation is merely a way to eliminate competitors or ease her own conscience. This was their last desperate move to make me look crazy, to discredit me in the eyes of anyone who might believe me. They struck at my weakest point, my age, my loneliness. The calculation was simple. Who would believe an award, heartbroken widow offered a successful young couple? He finished the article, folded the newspaper, and he felt nothing. No more offense, no more anger, just cold contempt. They thought they were playing chess. But in reality they had just overturned the board and by doing so signed their final sentence. He dialed Powell Stevens' number. Museum director speaking. Powell. It's Ava Jones. Did you read tonight's Gossip Hound? A heavy sigh came from the other end. He did. Ava, what garbage. He was just about to call you. My lawyers. Your lawyers won't be necessary. He interrupted him. I have a better idea. I think it's time for the museum to announce its new acquisition. Not the Salter, but something much more valuable. An hour later, he was in the director's office. Ephraim's notebook lay on the table before me. Powell, and the museum security chief leaned over it. He calmly and methodically explained what each entry, each date, and each license plate number meant. He showed them my diagram. He talked about the chemical composition of pigments, the techniques for artificially aging wood, and the forging of watermarks on paper. He spoke, and they listened, their faces growing more serious. There was no more condescension in the director's eyes. There was respect, and the eagerness of a professional who has hunted a major prize. They declared war. He sighed, closing the notebook. So, they'll get one. Tomorrow, pukul 11 a.m. in the museum's large conference room, we are calling a press conference. The next day, the hall was packed. Journalists from every major publication, television cameras, camera flashes, a buzzing hive, anticipating a scandal. He sat in the first row. Ephraim sat next to me, dressed in a plain, though well-maintained, suit. He was as calm as a rock. Powell Stephens walked up to the podium. He looked imposing and authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. He began. The museum has called you together today for a very important reason. As you know, our primary mission is the preservation of cultural heritage, and today we want to announce a new vital step in this direction. He paused. We are introducing a new position to our staff, Special Consultant for Antiquities and Authenticity. It is with immense honor that he introduced the person who will hold this post, a person whose name is synonymous with impeccable reputation and the highest level of professionalism in this field. Please welcome Eva Jensen. He turned and he looked at me. Silence hung in the hall for a second, followed by sparse, confused applause. Journalists exchanged glances. The author of yesterday's Gossip Hound article dropped their pen. He stood up and he walked to the podium. He looked out at the hall, at the camera flashes, at the dozens of curious eyes, and he began to speak calmly, clearly, without notice. He told them about titanium dioxide, about the difference in the glow of old and the new varnish under ultraviolet light. He spoke not as a victim or a crazy old woman. He spoke as an expert giving a lecture. The hall fell silent. They listened, holding their breath. Andy now, he sighed at the end, he would like you to hear from the man whose courage and dedication to my husband's memory helped prevent a major theft from the public purse. Ephraim walked up to the podium. He placed his war notebook upon it. He just did what he had to do. He sighed quietly, but firmly. At that very moment, while the cameras were focused on Ephraim's notebook on the other side of the city, two unmarked cars pulled up to the home of my son, Andy his wife. They were just finishing packing their bags. The door was opened for them, not by them. The door was opened with a detective's key. When the press conference ended, Paul's assistant approached me. Miss Jones, he whispered. We just got word. They were apprehended, attempting to flee. He heard those words. They were apprehended and he felt nothing resembling triumph. There was no more joy, no more glee. There was only silence, a deep, deafening silence that followed a very long, exhausting noise. He slowly nodded to the assistant, accepting the news as a given, like a doctor's conclusion. Powell immediately stepped between me and the journalists who were closing in with no questions. That's all for today, ladies and gentlemen. Andy, thank you. His voice sounded like a guffaw closing in auction. He took my arm and ignoring the murmuring led me through the surface exit away from the chaos. From that day on, my life changed. More accurately, it didn't change. It began. The first thing he did upon returning home was throw open all the windows wide. He took down the heavy, dusty drapes that had hung there for decades, letting the sun and the air into the apartment. The rooms filled with light, and it turned out they weren't so gloomy after all. The dust dancing in the sunbeams no longer seemed like a symbol of oblivion. Now it was just dust that needed to be wiped away. The apartment transformed. It ceased to be a mausoleum for one great man. It became a living workspace for another. Wem's books still stood on the shelves, but now mine appeared beside them. On his desk, which he left by the wall as a tribute, there was now a vase of fresh flowers. Not stacks of old manuscripts, and my writing desk in the center of the room hummed with a quiet active life. It was cluttered with books, printouts, and the photographs of antiques sent for appraisal from all over the country. The iron no longer smelled of tobacco and decay. It smelled of lemon polish, freshly brewed coffee, and the printer's ink of new catalogues. The sound of the phone ringing. He was sitting at the desk, examining a photograph of an enameled lacket with my loupe. The phone rang, sharp and demanding. He picked up the receiver without taking my eyes off the intricate pattern. Jones, hello? Miss Jones, this is the Legacy Auction House. We're calling about the Fabra cigarette case. We have documents confirming the provenance. Very solid paperwork. I chuckled to myself. Paperwork is the easiest thing to fake. Is the master's hallmark authentic? He asked. Absolutely perfect. It's too perfect, young man, he replied, pushing the photograph aside. My voice was calm and firm. Carl Faber had an apprentice during that period with a slight Fiesen defect. He always set the hallmark, slightly tilting it to the light by fractions of a millimeter. Yours is set as if by a ruler. It's modern work done using old sketches. Very good work, but what nonetheless. No more, the provenance is fake. Tell your client just that. A stunned silence hung on the other end. I've signed my piece. He hung up the phone and he picked up the loop again. Twice a week, he led seminars at the museum for young curators, for art history students. He stood in the bright, spacious hall before a dozen young faces, hungry for knowledge. They looked at me not as an elderly woman, but as a source of knowledge that couldn't be read in any textbook. They hung on my every word. Never trust first impressions, he told them, holding an ancient reliquary. Beauty can lie, history can lie, even science can be used to lie, but the object itself, the thing, never lies. You just have to learn to listen to its quiet voice. Look here at this scroll work. Do you see how the light plays on the patina? It lies too evenly. Real time is merciless. It leaves scars, wear, traces of human touch. A&D here studies only the flawless work of a chemist. He looked at their shining eyes and understood this was it. This was the true legacy. Not in granite and marble, but in this transmission of knowledge, in this spark of love for authenticity that he was igniting in them, just as Kama had once ignited it in me. Today, after the seminar, he didn't go straight home. The day was surprisingly warm and sunny. He bought a bouquet of white lilies and he drove to Pine Ridge's cemetery. Everything here was different, too. Sunlight broke through the foliage, and the shadows no longer seemed sinister. They simply offered coolness. He walked along the familiar path, and my heart was quiet and peaceful. He approached our crypt. The granite door was closed forever. He knew that everything inside had been set in order now. There were no more hidden compartments, no more dirty, foreign objects, only peace. He placed the flowers on the cold stone. The white lilies stood out brightly against the dead granite. He ran my palm over the engraved letters. Kwame Jensen. And he didn't feel the sharp cutting pain that had haunted me all those years. Only a gentle quiet sadness and gratitude remained. Well, Kaame, he whispered, everything is right now, everything is in its place. He stood for a little longer, inhaling the scent of the flowers and the decaying leaves. He was here not as a widow who had come to mourn her loss. He was here as a woman who had reclaimed her name, her dignity, and her future. Turning to leave, he saw Ephraim's figure in the distance at the turn of the path. He was sweeping the driveway. He saw me, stopped, and he simply nodded once, solemnly and respectfully. He nodded back at him. It was our silent salute, the salute of two custodians. He walked toward the exit, the sun shining on my back. He was no longer the shadow of my great husband. He was not the mother of my fallen son. He was Eva Jones, and my liberation was complete. And so the story of Eva Jones comes to an end. The story of a quiet woman who was ignored for decades by the people closest to her who took her love and self-sacrifice for granted. This is a tale not only of a terrible betrayal but also of incredible inner strength that like an old tool that has lost its power can be brought back to life. Eva found the courage not just to punish the guilty, but to completely reconstruct her own life, reclaiming her name, respect, and light to a future. Her story is a reminder that it's never too late to remember who you truly are. But her choice was incredibly difficult. Do you think she did the right thing by handing her own son over to justice? Was it called revenge? Or was it the only correct way to protect her husband's legacy and her own honor? Could she, as a mother, have found another path? Try to forgive or save him differently? Andy, would you like to know what happened to Eva next? How did her new career unfold? Andy, did Jabari ever try to contact her after everything that happened? Your thoughts are very important to us. If you have any questions about the story or are simply curious about any details that remained off camera, please write about them in the comments. Please like this video if the story touched you and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new captivating stories. Your feedback is the best reward for our work. We wish you all the best. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so we can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.